But before going into introducing all our speakers today, let me give the floor to Dimitris Triantafylou, who is our partner in crime in this talk series. Dimitri?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Mustafa. Yes, I'd like on my end also to welcome all of you here. I'm the director of the Center for International European Studies at Kadir Has University, and together with the International Relations Council of Turkey and UIK Panorama, led by Mustafa Aydin, we've had this idea to launch this foreign policy talks. This is our third series. We started this during our lockdown period. We had a good conversation on Greek-Turkish relations. We had another one also a couple of weeks ago on security in the Black Sea region. And this is our third one where we talk about Cyprus. And we plan to continue doing this soon. Probably this is the last one before the summer break, but we'll start in September. And I'm sure we'll come back to this and other issues again soon. So again, on my end, I'd like to welcome you all, and Mustafa, floor is yours.
Okay, let me introduce all our speakers to you first, and we'll go right into the discussions. Let me start on my screen here, since we are on screen. On my left here, Erol Kaymak, who is a professor of international relations at Eastern Mediterranean University in northern Cyprus. He has been involved on both research and also public relations issues regarding Cyprus. He has been conducting public opinion surveys and research reports, projects, and etc. He is also co-founder and former director of Cyprus-based think tank, the Center for Sustainable Peace and Democratic Development. He is the co-coordinator of Cyprus chapter of Greek Turkish Forum. Second, again, according to my line of sight, Charis Psaltis. He is also a co-coordinator of Cyprus chapter of Greek Turkish Forum, but he is also associate professor of social and development psychology at the University of Cyprus. And he has worked in a number of universities, both in Cyprus and abroad. He currently runs University Center for Field Studies at the University of Cyprus, and also co-directs the Genetic Social Psychology Lab. And he has conducted several researches, one of which he's going to share with us, and very interesting survey regarding the Cyprus issue, how the Cypriots on both sides see the future. Then I have Emine Çolak, who is a practicing Turkish Cypriot lawyer of Nicosia Bar since 1982, specializing human rights. She has, apart from her practicing law side, she has been active in civil society for years. She was Turkish Cypriot coordinator of the committees negotiating laws attached to the comprehensive solution proposal during the Annan Plan period. And she's also co-founder and the head of the Turkish Cypriot Human Rights Foundation for 10 years. And of course, she's a member of Greek Turkish Forum of Forum Cyprus chapter. The last speaker today we have is, let me try now, Xenia Constantinou, right? Xenia studied political science at the University of Cyprus and international relations at the University of Essex. She has been actively engaged in the grassroots level movement supporting for peace processes in Cyprus and for Cyprus. And she's currently an elected member of the Parliament of the Republic of Cyprus, representing Democratic Rally DC party. And also she's a member of Greek Turkish Forum too. So we are, since myself and Dimitri also a member of Greek Turkish Forum, this is of course not, I have to have a disclaimer here, this is not an event of Greek Turkish Forum, but we are all members of that that institution, let me say. So today we are going to discuss what's happening in Cyprus. And I'd like to start with Erol Kaymak, who has already written a piece recently regarding the measures both sides took during the COVID-19 crisis, and how this is really affecting, or how this have affected the Cyprus relationship between two communities on Cyprus. Erol, could you give us a maybe, I don't know, 5-7 minutes rundown what has happened during the crisis? Could you? Can I? Yes. Yes, you can speak now.
Okay, first, a disclaimer on my part. I have an internet connection problem apparently, so we'll see how it goes. And the second disclaimer. So thank you so much for organizing this and declaring me one of the people who knows what's going on there, but I'm not there, and many of our viewers actually are there, so they'd know better what really happened. But I'd like to say a few things.
Sometimes it's
Northern
better
Cyprus
to
is
watch
usually
it from abroad. Sometimes it's better to watch it from abroad.
Oh yes, distance is
exactly.
Well, hopefully that proves to be the case. In any case, I just like to comment that Northern Cyprus is usually seen as an anomaly, right? Analytically speaking, so forth. But what's really surprising is that we have all these countries.
Erol.
Many of them are all very well with the cultural success. Only yes.
Erol, could you allow me to close your video, because your sound is breaking? If we close your video and you can speak, it might be better. Let me try closing your video. Okay, it's not happening. Guys, could you help me?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, could you close the video of Erol? Then he can be better.
But he already disconnected, I believe.
Oh, he's gone. Erol. Okay, he's gone. Sorry. Let's try to get him back. In the meantime, let me turn to Xenia. She's on the island, and she's of course watched and be part of this COVID-19 crisis, at least on the south of the island. Xenia, could you tell us your experience and what happened on both, as much as you could follow what happened on both sides? Let us open your sound. Okay, you can talk now.
So good evening, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. Certainly, I find these discussions very, very important to have a complete picture of what is going on both sides of the island. So the question is how pandemic affected the relation between the two communities. I would answer that it severely affected them, because due to the pandemic, it was considered that it was essential to limit the crossings from the checkpoints that currently exist on the island, that are currently operating on the island. And this need to limit, due to the controls that they had to take place and the lack of personality, that they were able to be there to make these examinations. It was not feasible to operate all checkpoints throughout the Green Line. Unfortunately, the pandemic, as it was progressing, it forced, let's say, the complete closing of all checkpoints. And up to today, as we speak, there are still political discussions taking place in order to be able to reopen the checkpoints and to bring them back into a normality, if I may say, and call the checkpoints a normality, so that people, especially who live in faraway places, to be able to get through the other side. There have been some severe social problems created by this abnormality taking place, and of course what is the way that the journalists, and I agree with them, have described this whole situation is that it has been instrumentalized by especially some of the political parties in the north in an effort to bring the checkpoints into the political discussion currently taking place, also due to the upcoming elections coming October. The initial plan, before the pandemic, was that right after the elections in the north, we would be able, with the new leadership coming out of this, to regain the negotiation discussions from where they were left before. So I think that there has been a severe delay, first of all, due to the pandemic. And at the same time, I think that there has been an escalation also in terms of public opinion, mainly because also of the situation taking place in the borders between Turkey and Greece. And also, I believe that the migration flows coming from Turkey into Europe is also adding an extra burden, an extra constraint, let's say, on the whole of Europe-Turkey relations. And I think in this entire situation, also the relations between Greece and Cyprus in particular are also affected. Closing this parenthesis on the pandemic, I would say that there has been a lot of discussion concerning the future of Famagusta. At least among the Greek Cypriot community, there has been some severe concerns coming from the people who were living there before 1974, and there has been some real concern about statements concerning the future of Famagusta. And of course, there is the issue of the exploitation of the natural gas and the natural resources of Cyprus, which is also coming in as a prerequisite in order to regain the discussions concerning the holistic solution of the Cyprus problem. So I think that currently the situation is not really, we are not really going through any honeymoon period. I would say that the situation has driven the two communities, both the leaderships of the two communities, but also the people of the communities to deepen the gap that already exists between them. So from now on, I would really like to discuss the need to take down the escalation, especially between the statements coming from Greece and Turkey officials concerning the need of exploiting the natural gas resources in the Aegean. And I would also say that the need to start again the communication between the two communities to regain the lives that people used to have before, especially for those people that they were able to cross for their daily needs, for working on the other side. I think this is also very crucial in order to regain some level of trust between the two communities and to be able to begin the new effort that hopefully will begin right after the elections in the north in a more fruitful environment, let's say, So this is for as my initial let's say statement, and we will get back in the discussion that will follow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Xenia. I think you gave us quite a few issues that we can open up the discussion from there. I think we have Erol, or he was just coming in. Let me see whether he's already in. Yes, he's in. Okay, trying to unmute. Okay, there is Erol. Erol, are you here? Can you hear us?
I don't know where I am. Yes.
Yes, great.
I'm here.
You are there. Okay, the question
hear me?
stands there. We can hear you. Now, since we can hear you, let's immediately listen what you have to say.
Yeah, this is very disconcerting because I don't know if you hear anything I'm saying at the moment.
We are hearing you, Erol. We are hearing you. Don't worry. Go ahead.
You are good. Yeah, I was trying to say that Cyprus is an anomaly that despite having bad governance in northern Cyprus, we've been able to keep the pandemic at bay. You might argue that that's just dumb luck. In fact, while we were all conflicted about the Greek Cypriots unilaterally closing the borders, at that moment, some German tourists came, and just by chance, we determined in northern Cyprus that they had the COVID-19. And after that, in very short order, northern Cyprus went into a very strict lockdown. And I say strict lockdown because I have been comparing it to my experiences here in Berlin, Germany, where things have been quite liberal by comparison. The net result, of course, is that you have 0 cases for several weeks now. And that's really amazing. But of course, this leads us to the current agenda and government in northern Cyprus, and that is how to ease the lockdown. And although the opposition was generally very supportive during the lockdown, now I see that there's a lot of disagreements about how to proceed with easing of the lockdown, especially with respect to flights coming in to northern Cyprus, to Ercan, Timbu, whatever you want to call it, as of the 1st of July. Do you hear me, by the way? Okay.
Yes, Erol, yes, we are.
I guess I'll continue. At
Yes,
present, and until the 1st of July, only citizens and permanent residents are granted entry and subject to quarantine. But all of those restrictions, or most of those restrictions, will be lifted as of the 1st. And countries which are categorized as Group A, low-risk countries, residents from those countries will be admitted with a PCR test. And this was presumably what was to happen for Turkish residents from mainland Turkey as of 1st of July. But now all those plans are in disarray because, as we probably all know, the pandemic seems to be picking up steam again in Turkey. And so the categorization of Turkey as a low-risk country has raised a lot of concerns. In fact, I think that tomorrow the labor unions will be staging a public demonstration of protest against the government's policies. The government itself is revising this and now trying to shift Turkey's category, I think, from A to B. But of course, perhaps Turkey should be in a category C, depending on how you look at the statistics provided by the World Health Organization. So there's a lot of problems with implementing a policy. Moreover, there's the problem of implementing a policy based on PCR tests. Even if the Turkish Cypriot authorities grant Turkish nationals category B status, this means that given the policy that they wish to implement, that individuals will be subject to a PCR within 72 hours from Turkey, but then upon arrival in northern Cyprus, but all second PCR test. And this would probably outstrip the capabilities and resources of the healthcare system in northern Cyprus, leading to backlogs. The alternative of what do you call quarantine is also highly problematic if you want to restart the economy. So that's where we are with respect to the relations with the Turkey and flights. And of course, there are many other issues, including
I think we again lost Erol Kaymak. Sorry about this, guys. This happens. It's beyond our ability to control. So let's go to Emine. Emine, you are watching, of course. You are in Cyprus at the moment, and elections are coming in the north, and you are watching both north and south, the political developments. Could you tell us what's happening, especially on the north, and how this elections is going to affect the Cyprus issue, but also your opinion of the current issues of relevance to the Cyprus discussion?
Yes, thank you, Mustafa. Thank you for this whole event. I'd just like to follow up the issue of elections by reminding us all that elections were to be held in April 2020. That's what the constitution required. But because of the pandemic, it was postponed to October. One of the parties has challenged the constitutionality of this, but until that's decided, it's a fact. But at the same time, it also means that the status of the leader, Akıncı, as negotiator, as the one at the table, is one that is crippled by this status, because it's he needs to be re-elected to have full power, even if there were no other restrictions about meeting. The other thing that's useful to bear in mind is when we talk about elections, the elections that have been postponed from April to October, we're talking about the election of the leader, or our president, who conducts the talks. He, unlike the Greek Cypriot side, he is not the head of the executive. We have a parliamentary system. So at the moment, from Parliament, we have a coalition government of two more right of center parties. Tatar and Özersay are the names of the two leaders of those parties. One is Prime Minister, one is Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister. But the interesting picture there is that the present leader, Akıncı, and the two leaders of the parties in the coalition competing with each other, all of these, are all candidates at the next election. In addition to that, there are other members, two members at least, of the opposition in Parliament who also have their own candidates. But what's happened in this time of very important decisions to be taken, measures to be enforced, confidence to be given to the people that they were being looked after to the best of their ability, at least these three politicians, Akıncı, Özersay and Tatar, are also at the same time sort of just under the surface competing to get to be the most popular when we reach October for the elections. And unfortunately we've seen that how that has been playing out and tugging, and how one person has tried to get credit for a good decision, or another person has tried to do something positive and been blocked by the others. These are political games that I'm sure all over sort of global politics as well, but it's very worrying here. Erol has mentioned that being I guess it's bizarrely and ironically, this has been an upside to being isolated. We only have one point of international flights, and by international we mean only planes who have come through Turkey. And once you shut that down to scheduled flights, then that's easier to control. We have 2 ports which are also easy to control. So we have, after that immediate strict lockdown, we've been able to stop new cases coming in. And I guess it is a success story to only have 4 deaths, 2 of which were the German tourists that Erol referred to, and 2 local people with other health problems. And it's been now over 2 months that we have no cases of corona in North Cyprus. Now, where in this situation, when you start to talk about relaxing the lockdown and allowing people to come from Turkey or people to cross through the checkpoints, yes, everyone is quite nervous about how this is going to be controlled and why. This is an internal political important complaint, and that is our government shut us down, shut down our workplaces, had us stay at home, and we were most on the whole obedient and careful and listened to the instructions. But in return for that, we were expecting, and this is the whole point of lockdown, that the government then takes measures about improving its health facilities in the case of an increase on reopening, and prepares and tests and does all the other things during this period of time to make people feel safer. For example, a pandemic hospital. What is now an internal criticism of the government and a bad use of funds actually is that we have no pandemic hospital still. We've been promised one, but it's not happened. We don't even know which of the existing hospitals are designated pandemic hospitals. We have insufficient equipment for anybody that would need intensive care with corona. So this makes us even more nervous about opening up and people or corona being imported, because now we can safely say that there's no corona actually here. But once people start coming in, how are you going to stop it? On the other hand, the economy requires we also have a modest amount of dependence on tourism. So how are you going to restart and get that economic activity control without letting people in? The rules you put into place, okay, they will control the spread up to a point, but you also need to be prepared that you can't promise 100% success in stopping corona coming in. I agree with Xenia, and it's very obvious that the whole shutdown of the crossings because of the pandemic automatically creates a freeze in the interaction that we were able to enjoy, I guess, previously, whereby people cross, meet, have social contacts, work, study. Schools and university students have also been prevented until very recently. And now there are a whole load of very complicated and sort of moving goalposts regarding what is needed to cross to one side or the other. And then one crossing will be opened by our side, but then we hear that the other side has not opened that crossing. So the total lack of sitting around a table or around a Zoom screen and discussing cooperation over how you deal with this between the leadership on the 2 sides is appalling. And it's not a good sign at all for a future in which we try to reunite, find a solution, find a way forward, find a way to deal with hydrocarbons. If we can't deal with something so basic in a cooperative way, then it doesn't look very good, and I'm very disappointed with that. But I would say that these 2 points that I've raised, one is the inability to have good communication and contact between the 2 sides, and the internal political dynamics of a run-up to an election in which the major political players are all competing with each other. They are connected because you need a government, you need a leadership who, with vision and courage and constructive attitude towards the other side. But if they're all competing for in a very unconstructive manner, then it's not a good sign at all. It's not good for the present, and it's certainly not good for the future. So again, we repeat this again and again, that the leadership that we need to really take the whole Cyprus problem to a better point is not there. And it's shown itself even more during the pandemic. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Emine. Before going to Charis, let me remind you, those who are watching in Facebook could ask questions there. You can write your questions in Facebook so we can get them from Facebook. Those who are watching here on Zoom, you can write your questions in the chat under the page, under the screen. So if you have any questions, please write to us and I'll try to ask them to the speakers. So let's go to Charis, who has conducted a very recent survey actually. And I had the privilege of listening some part of it earlier last week. And there are very interesting results. So let's hear what he found and its implications for the Cyprus issue. Charis.
Yes, thank you very much, Mustafa, and thank you very much for the invitation. I will talk a bit about this recent research that was co-conducted with the University of Kent, and specifically with my colleague Neophytos Loizidis, who is a professor there. But first, I wanted to just mention a couple of comments on what the speakers earlier, Emine, Xenia, and Erol, mentioned in relation to the opening and the closing of the checkpoints, because I think I do agree with them that it has been a blow to the opportunities that people had to come in contact. We should not forget that according to our research, up to now, about half of Turkish Cypriots and about 1/4 of Greek Cypriots state in the research that they have a friend from the other community. So if you go down at the personal level of relationships, you realize that a lot of people have been actually been disrupted from engaging with their friends across the divide. We know again from research that in the last 10, 15 years since the opening of the checkpoints, a lot of ground has been gained in terms of NGO work, civil society organizations working together, the establishment of the Home for Cooperation opposite Lydra Palace in the Nicosia area of the buffer zone. So all of this has been largely disrupted. But I would say here that we also need to think of the effect this closing had, because I think we should not take for granted that because the checkpoints are closed, that means that people are turning towards against each other. Because what we're actually seeing is that there is a lot of pressure from pro-reconciliation people who are pressing both sides to reopen the checkpoints, even on the first day of the closing of the checkpoints from the Greek Cypriot leadership. Just when the corona crisis was starting, we had a big rally against that closing at the Lydra Palace, Lydra Street. So you would see that this kind of situation is bringing more pressure from this part of the population in both communities to actually reopen the checkpoints. And there's another aspect to it, which has to do with developments in public opinion after the Crans-Montana failure, which is a longer time frame compared to the last 3 months, obviously, but we had the closing of the checkpoints. So obviously a lot of things happened in the last 3 years after the failure of the Grand Montana meeting, and we need to understand how people perceive the situation that is evolving after that failure. So at least from a Greek Cypriot perspective, the developments have not been not at all positive. We have seen escalation in the Eastern Mediterranean around the issue of hydrocarbons. We have seen Turkey drilling in areas that the Republic of Cyprus has somehow defined as their economic zone. This is causing tension. We have seen recent tensions with Greece. And again, one should not take these tensions as somehow automatically leading public opinion to be against the solution, because what I will present in a few minutes is that you will see that people are actually coming closer towards the idea of a solution and a compromise compared to what has been happening 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. So I will share some findings on my screen with the audience here.
Did you share? We haven't seen.
Just a minute. Yes, okay, now it should come up.
Right, great.
So let's go from the beginning.
Charis, could you use the whole page version? If you go to bottom presentation version, go to the bottom of your screen, bottom right. Yeah, bottom right here. I cannot touch it, but anyway, okay, let's. Yes, that's one. Great.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, that's
so can you see the whole screen, Mustafa?
Yes, exactly. Oh. Yes, right.
Okay. So this was research that was completed just before the closing of the checkpoints that we discussed earlier. It was completed just before the Corona crisis, and the data collection took part about 4 to 5 months before the closing of the checkpoints. So we asked a series of questions in relation to how people see the bizonal bicommunal federation solution. And what you see here is that there is about 1/4 of the population in both communities that reject the idea of a federation. But a positive finding in this regard is that the majority is actually either in favor of a solution or they would tolerate it if necessary. So that adds up to 76 in the Greek Cypriot community, and it adds up to 72 in the Turkish Cypriot community. And it's also interesting to have a look at the way the Greek Cypriot public opinion, as I said earlier, is developing in the after Grand Montana period. So you can see that very clearly in the graph here. The light green is the people who consider the solution on the basis of a BBF as ideal or desirable. The dark green is the people who would tolerate it if they have to, if it's necessary. And the red is the people who reject it. So you see here that there is a clear trend, upward trend of people who accept bizonal bicommunal federation after Grand Montana, and a clear declining trend in the people who reject bizonal bicommunal federation. Then we had a question about their stance on the unitary state. And very clearly you see here that the two communities are quite different in how they view the unitary state, because the majority of Greek Cypriots consider it as the ideal solution to the Cyprus problem, whereas the most Turkish Cypriots reject it, at least the bigger group of Turkish Cypriots reject this idea. And then we have their stance on the two-state solution. In that scenario, we thought of stating as an option that both two states would become EU members. And I think the findings here were very clear that there is a vast majority of Greek Cypriots who find it unacceptable. They state that's entirely unacceptable, 84%. Whereas for Turkish Cypriots, the majority actually says it's something acceptable or even desirable. Going back to the Greek Cypriot trends in the last 10 years, this graph that you see here concerns the view of Greek Cypriots about the two-state solution. And you see that it's not surprising that there is a clear rejection of the idea, which seems to be unchanging in the last 10 years, actually. If you have a look, since 2010, there is a steady percentage of over 70% that reject the idea of a two-state solution. Another interesting finding was the stance of the participants on the idea of the continuation of the current situation, or the status quo, as we usually state in research. And again, here there's an interesting difference in the two communities. You see that the vast majority of Greek Cypriots now reject the status quo. And I will come to the changing trends in a bit in the Greek Cypriot community. And you also here see that the majority of Turkish Cypriots could actually accept it, or a significant percentage also find it highly desirable or satisfactory. Here, sorry, this is in Greek, but I will just explain what this is. You can just follow the colors, as I said earlier. It's the stance of Greek Cypriots towards the status quo, the current situation. So what you see here is that after Crans-Montana, there is and specifically the last year, actually, only in the last year, there was a huge increase of people, around 30% increase, who reject the current situation. And in my eyes, it makes sense, because I think the situation with the dead end in the hydrocarbons issues, the escalation that we are seeing not only in the south of Cyprus in the sea, but also between Greece and Turkey, is making a lot of people very concerned about where this is going. So I think people are becoming more pragmatist in that sense, giving a more fair evaluation of the possibility of getting out of this situation with a solution of the Cyprus problem. And this is the final slide I wanted to share with you. We also thought with Neophytos Loizidis of Kent that it might be a good idea to test some kind of, some people talk about in Cyprus about thinking out of the box, etc., different kinds of options for solution. So we thought, let's ask the idea of Greek Cypriots being in the EU, having two states in Cyprus, and Turkish Cypriots having a special relationship with the EU. You see here that the vast majority of Greek Cypriots again reject this option, but the majority of Turkish Cypriots accept this option. So just to summarize, because I don't want to spend more of the time of our participants here, I would say that the last 3 years indicate, at least make visible to a lot of people that the situation is unsustainable. So the status quo is not something that can actually continue, but the idea of separatism and the two-state solution is not something that Greek Cypriots are ready to accept. So I think here we need to refocus our attention after the elections in the north to see what could be a compromise solution in both communities. And this research, along with a lot of research that was done earlier in Cyprus, constantly looks towards what this compromise solution could be. And this is the bizonal bicommunal federation. It's the only solution that both communities could actually accept, as we have seen earlier, around 70–75%. So I think that's the way forward. I would add that it's also important to go beyond the general idea of accepting BBF into the details of what this kind of BBF solution would look like. So we know that in the last discussion in Crans-Montana, we had the Guterres framework. It described certain dimensions like implementation, withdrawal of troops, territory, compensations, so a lot of dimensions. I think it's important to identify variations of these dimensions and give them as options to people. This is what we have actually done with neophytos with a new method called the conjoint analysis in the research, and ask people to choose between packages where we vary these dimensions. In that way, we will be able to identify acceptable solutions in both communities, and we have actually done so. We will be in a position to present these findings very soon. So stay tuned. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Charis. I think this was very interesting results. Could you take the presentation? Yes. Before going further, there is a specific question to you regarding the methodology. Does this data for Turkish Cypriots cover the Turkish settlers' opinion as well? And if so, how they differ from islanders, Turkish Cypriots?
Yes, this is a very good question, and I always get this question. So usually what we do when we conduct the research in the north is that we have a filter question where we ask people who have voting rights and people who do not have voting rights. So we only take people 18 and over who have voting rights. What does that mean? That means that about 1/3 of the electoral list, and because we are dealing with representative sample surveys here, actually capture the opinion of people who come from Turkey and who have been given citizenship. So the short answer here is that 1/3 of the sample in the north is people who come from Turkey. And to answer the second part of the question, whether there are significant differences, when you look into the details of the 4 proposed different kinds of solutions, you actually see minor differences between Turkish Cypriots and people who come from Turkey. Where you find bigger differences is sometimes on issues of relationships with Greek Cypriots, and that has its explanation because, as you know, people who come from Turkey in the north are not allowed to cross to the south. So they don't have the same equal opportunity to establish relationships and friendships with Greek Cypriots. And we know that this helps a lot in building trust, reducing prejudice. So sometimes we find that people from Turkey might be a bit more prejudiced compared to Turkish Cypriots. But beyond that, I think most of the people who have been given citizenship in the north up to now have actually shown no significant or large differences on their political stance at least towards these 4 types of solutions that we have examined earlier.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's a very good explanation. Okay, I see Erol somewhere around here, but I'm trying to unmute. Okay, Erol, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Yes.
We can hear you perfectly also. Give us your opinion now.
Okay. On my opinion, on which topic? What shall we talk about?
Anything you want to talk.
Anything I want to talk about.
No, I mean, okay. Tell us if you have recent surveys also in the northern part of the island, how people are generally seeing alternative solutions on the northern part of the island, and also, of course, what are you seeing as the current issues that will complicate in the forthcoming negotiations if they come at all?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this will be entirely anecdotal, not based on any data that I'm privy to. Yes. As far as I can tell, the COVID-19 crisis is dominating at the moment, and nobody's talking about the Cyprus problem. Although there are these hydrocarbon issues, the status of Maraş, Varosha, and other related issues, none of these really are percolating to the fore. So we haven't really entered the electoral campaign phase yet. When we do, inevitably the question will arise again. One of the parallel questions is about, of course, the management of Northern Cyprus as a whole. And so a lot of people are now talking about whether we really do need a presidential system. I should point out that one of the reasons why we can't cooperate with the Greek Cypriots regarding the crossings through the health committee, the Bicommunal Health Committee and the other committees is precisely because Mr. Akıncı doesn't have any executive authority and must defer to the local government on all issues. And as you probably know, among the candidates, Mr. Özersay has been emphasizing just this, that in order to normalize relations with the Greek Cypriots, we have to get out of the negotiation framework of a bicommunal, bizonal federation and start discussing two-sided kind of cooperation agreements, not necessarily confederal setup, but perhaps a much more functional arrangement in the future. So I predict that these discussions will continue depending on who wins the election in October, unless the election comes earlier than that. In other words, if Mr. Akıncı wins the election, this crisis will continue, and we probably will have a big difficulty in restarting the negotiations. If someone else gets elected, of course, again, we'll have a big crisis because we won't have any basis for talking with one another. So no matter how I look at it, I really don't see how we're going to get through this crisis. And although I have utmost respect for the polling data and the possibility and potential for a bottom-up approach, the reality in Cyprus is that we don't allow civil society and other individuals to partake at all in bicommunal power structures. In the case of Akıncı, I should point out that he did introduce civil society to his technical committee. However, on the Greek Cypriot side, that wasn't the case. And irrespective of all of this, the technical committees cannot substitute for the political will of the sides. So it's really going to be a testing time, in my opinion, in the coming months. And I don't know what's going to happen as of September when Turkey tests the waters with Greece, and we see whether Greece will respond to that. We can speculate how that may affect relations in Cyprus as well. So unfortunately, I'm quite pessimistic about where we're going.
Okay, thank you, Erol. I have my own questions, but there is an interesting question from the audience. I know the answer, but I think it's worth discussing, especially hypothetically for the future. The question is, are there any common values beyond welfare between two communities? and there are examples like universities, joint universities, or sport clubs, or a TV operated jointly by a Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot, so on and so forth. So I think this is I know the answer, but why don't you look for the future? What do you think this idea? I'll ask two ladies, both Emine and Xenia. Let's start with Xenia.
Well, dear Mustafa, let me tell you that at least Emine and we have worked on any possible innovative idea you can think of in order to bring the two communities together. And we have been using technology and the internet since the very early of 2000, maybe even before that, trying to bring the communities, the youngsters, people of common interests together. And there has been a huge effort, but I should tell you the following: even though we have tried also to, and we have seen efforts to publish and join the newspaper and join radio station, etc., and join websites and so on. There has been a major impact of what is going on the political level to the grassroots level of the what we call the bicommunal movement in Cyprus. And every time that there is the perspective of having a solution, every time that there is a negotiation going on and there is a public interest from both sides concerning the end result of the negotiation, there has been also more involvement from both communities in such activities. But when there are periods like the one that we are living in now, and there is this pessimism, I would also agree with Erol that we don't see anything coming out, at least in the immediate future. Then believe me, it's very, very difficult to convince the people to get involved in any kind of, let's say, bicommunal activities. But when it comes to what we share, well, we certainly share a lot. And first of all, we share a common country, a common island, and a common, let's say, understanding of what has been at least the future that we would like to see for our children, at least. So there are certainly many things that keep us in common, but unfortunately the political is always a very dividing factor. So this is why it's really important to regain the negotiations. And of course, the situation as is evolving between Greece and Turkey is always a mirror for the island of Cyprus. So if we have a good climate there, then it reflects positively on the island. If not, then immediately the people, I think, from both sides, they are much more reluctant to be positive concerning the future solution of federal Cyprus.
Thank you very much, Xenia. Of course, it's very difficult for the ordinary people to always keep the hope up and to keep trying to engage after seeing so many failures during the negotiations. Of course, the politicians have a big role to play and affect the people's opinion. I mean, I think you have also engaged in this kind of several cross-community programs. What do you say? The same question. Are there any common values? And could we do something more? I mean, you know, a newspaper, maybe not a newspaper, nobody reads newspaper anymore, but a TV station, a program, or whatever.
Yeah, I agree with Xenia that people like us have tried and made some headway in just about every possible field, whether it's young people getting together, young people having sports activities, women mediators organizing events. There are many lines of activity and joint interest. There's groups who work together on environment and education, but put all this in one basket. Then there's the other basket, and I've been asked to comment on this, but I have the interesting experience of having worked in all those areas of attempting to improve cooperation, and also having been in a post where my community appointed me Minister for Foreign Affairs, and having to go out and speak on behalf of my community, or have contacts with people in different countries or the European Union and so on. And there, it was just one example. There are several examples where the issue of recognition, even by implication, even indirectly and remotely, of the TRNC in the north is considered totally politically impossible. So that means that when you do try to do something that has any kind of official connection, you can't get it off the ground. For example, maybe the doctors' associations, if they want to, they get together and they can talk and make plans. But an official from the Republic of Cyprus Health Ministry and an official from our Health Ministry cannot sit at the same table and do something. The only slight exception, the only little leeway there is that under the negotiations process, there are what they're called technical committees, and people go there, and it's kind of like a bubble in which everybody makes more of an effort to shed their official titles and just get on with work. But even there, we know that there are many incidents of insufficient progress, but there are also fantastic exceptions, like the Technical Committee on Cultural Heritage, who do fantastic work because they just get on with it. And again, it's a lot to do with political will and courage and vision. In this context, I have to say that I agree with all the negative and the pessimistic views expressed. There was one thing that happened during this pandemic, and it was a terrible forest fire in the north, to which not only did planes come from Turkey, which we're used to, they support us whenever they can with a forest fire, but also planes came to put out the fire from the Republic of Cyprus. This is a first. And it was spoken about, and then it sort of got brushed aside, whereas I think it's really very significant and it needs more attention because it was a first. We had horrific fires in past years, starting way back in the 90s, when this was discussed and people like us said, well, why don't we cooperate? Why don't we help each other out? You know, this is the forests of all of Cyprus disappearing, and it just didn't happen. During the past months, this happened for the first time, and I'm very impressed. I'm very proud. I wish we could make more of it as an example of cooperation. And you know, who was talking then about whose airspace is it, and is that plane allowed? And no, we're talking about trying to save forests. Yeah. So we need more of this spirit, more of this vision, more of this leadership. Because yes, there are a lot of things in common, but if we put obstacles in front of ourselves that the politicians are prioritizing, then it's harder to make progress. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I mean, obviously, as I understood from both your responses, the leadership is the paramount importance. The leaders have to be courageous to go beyond the conventional thinking and sometimes go beyond the traditional state-to-state relationship, or at least thinking in those terms, maybe put the humanity up front. There is a question, and I'll try to ask this to Erol, if I can get Erol here. Erol, are you on the line?
Yes, I'm following you.
Great. This is a question from Cihan Dizdaroğlu, who is now last couple of years directly working on the island and conducting surveys, and he's preparing a new survey to be published shortly by PRIO Cyprus Center and Frederick Ebert Stiftung. And he's been working with the Cypriot youth. And he says that in his research, it shows the majority of the youth on both sides, of course, are very pessimistic about the solution in Cyprus. And when he asked an open-ended question about expectation for a solution to the Cyprus problem, more than half of the Cypriot youth on both sides say that they believe that it will never be solved. So the question is, how can this pessimist perception of the youth and younger generation can be addressed on both communities? Because even if leaders agree at one point a solution for the island, then it has to be put to the two communities. And the younger generation have lesser memories, of course, living together. How can we address this problem?
Well, I think I partially mentioned that the evolution of the Cyprus problem will address it. People have grown accustomed to the crossings, for instance. They enjoy the crossings, so they support the crossings. So independent of a comprehensive settlement to the Cyprus problem, you can bring people on board through functional cooperation. I'm not saying that I support that as a political paradigm, but I definitely think that the reality of the situation is that we are never really going to solve all aspects of the Cyprus problem. As we all know, the all or nothing approach was precisely designed because the leaders were so reluctant to take risks and to engage in any binding pre-negotiations. So we have this problem that recognition always looms in every round of negotiation, and that affects the Greek Cypriot perspective so much that really there's no political will to move forward on a compromise package. That's been proven during the Annan plan. I don't mean to blame the Greek Cypriots exclusively for the failure of talks. I just want to point out that the way the negotiations are set up, it favors the status quo, and the status quo is the recognized Republic of Cyprus versus the unrecognized TRNC indefinitely. So young people are accustomed to that. They know that the previous generations have failed to negotiate a settlement, and they don't have the political will to follow through with anything more than that. So probably we really need to demonstrate goodwill and cooperation, as well as values that transcend the Cyprus problem. It's interesting, you know, for instance, the issue of racism has featured in Northern Cyprus this past week in completely unrelated ways, internal discussions. And it's important that we recognize that Cyprus isn't only comprised of native populations and Cypriot nationals. In fact, there was a report today, I think was reported by the Cyprus Mail, that among European countries, Cyprus in the south now has the second largest number of non-nationals residing, or something like that, within its borders. So not only are there new generations of Cypriots, in the future there'll be naturalized new generations of people who originate from other countries that populate Cyprus. So in many ways, they won't have an expectation of a reunified Cyprus. It will be a fiction to them. It won't be a reality at all. So I think the Cyprus problem will evolve in this direction.
Okay, thank you, Erol. I have several questions myself, but listeners keep asking questions. There is an interest, so I'll relay their questions first. Charis, this is for you. It's presumably connected to your research, of course. Do you believe the role played by civil society is influential, or is it only minor and has to be strengthened? Of course, here is the implication is that the question behind the question is whether it's the leaders or the politicians who shape the public opinions, or public is more important, and if we can get the public behind the solution, supporting the solutions, they might entice the leadership to work for a solution. There is a second question, but I think it's based on misunderstanding. Let me frame it with my wording. 80% of the Greeks find this status quo unacceptable. Only 20% of the Turks find it unacceptable. But from the Erol's explanation, when inertia set in, and if there is no hope to do something new, then what's left is the current status quo. You know, if you don't do anything, the status quo stays in. So there is this kind of a dilemma here. If 80% of the Greek Cypriots are finding it unacceptable, then I would say then Greek Cypriots should push for some sort of a solution. Let me hear your views.
Yes, thank you very much. These are very interesting and important questions. Well, to start from the last point, Mustafa, you mentioned, I do agree that actually Greek Cypriots need to press for a solution, but not only Greek Cypriots. I think also Turkish Cypriots need to press for a solution, and also Turkey needs to press for a solution, and also Greece, because I think the situation we are now living in is what we classically call a lose-lose situation. I don't think anybody is actually gaining from this situation. I think everybody is losing. I would give you just one example with the issue of hydrocarbons. If we still keep fighting over it, in 10 to 15 years from now, it will not even be a viable option to somehow get it out of there, because the renewable energy will become the new game in town. So that's just one example, I think. And I wanted to comment, I hope I'm not just the only person here who is optimistic. I sometimes tend to have a look from a more optimistic view when I observe research findings and trends in the last 10 years and how they evolve. So for example, you might find some disappointing findings, but you also sometimes find very encouraging findings. And I will start from Cihan's comment about the youth, because I know he's doing very great research on the issue of youth. I have also studied the youth a lot. And we have a new research with one PhD student of mine, Marios Kyriakidis, who collected data during the 2006-2015 period when the two leaders were on very good terms. They were kept having meetings. A very good climate was happening between the two communities. And what we have seen there, it was a radical positive shift in the student population also. And it was mediated through what we call in-group norms. So when you start evaluating the views of your teachers and the policy of the ministry and the views of your parents, and you get a hopeful message that we might end up with a solution after all these years, somehow that changes the public opinion among the student population also very clearly towards a positive direction. The other positive message I have to do is that it's this malleability. The views of the youth are very malleable, actually. I remember a lot of examples of students of ours who visited the Home for Cooperation in the UN buffer zone and met Turkish Cypriot students with my colleague Chanel Husnu. We are both social psychologists, and we have actually animated a couple of workshops where they had the chance to discuss social psychology and intergroup conflict and peace building together. And the usual reaction of people is that they are just like us. These are people who might live in Paphos or Limassol, and as Erol said, they have been raised in separation, but they meet each other for the first time. How odd this is. Imagine you live in such a small island and they meet others for the first time, and they give you this very enthusiastic reply. Or let's take, for example, the Imagine program, which is actually supported by the Bicommunal Technical Committee of Education, and has brought around 1,000 students only in the last 2 or 3 years together at the Home for Cooperation. And these are exactly the same reactions. They're like us, why can't we be friends? You know, quite emotional comments coming from students that I think these are actually the future if we give them the opportunity. So that brings me to the major issue here. Are the leaderships and the political system ready to give these opportunities and facilitate and encourage? And that brings us back to the question of the political will and the role of the media. I'm afraid the role of the media in the Greek Cypriot community is very unproductive because it influences public opinion and it somehow holds back the potential, the very quite positive potential that all these kind of meetings and associations could actually bring to the front. So just to finish, we should not forget that there are at least 2 or 3 private schools, to come back to your question, Mustafa, that have a mixed population of Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot students. There is not yet a school established to be a bicommunal school, but we're hoping that this will be managed in the future. If you take the issue of language, of similarities, there are, you know, both communities speak the dialect of the standard Greek in Greece and the standard Turkish in Turkey. And you find a lot of common words there used in both dialects. And on issues of identity, we have also found from research recently that the trend in the last 10 years has been that the people who identify as Cypriots in both communities is on the increase. So that's also another positive development. I would be happy to take more questions if there are any.
Thank you, Charis. We have already passed 1 hour 15 minutes. Our audience and listeners, they are here. Nobody is leaving, which shows quite an interest, of course. But it's always nice to keep it short so that it's interesting. We can do again. Actually, I had several questions on the individual problems that I can think of, several of them, talking about Famagusta, Eastern Mediterranean, Greece-Turkey relations, their effect on the island, and etc. But this time, it seems that we focused more on the cooperation side rather than the problems, which is fine and which is better and nice. So let's finish on that note, and I will give you the floor one more time, and then maybe next time we'll discuss specific questions and problems and how to find solutions to them. There is one question, and I'll modify and I'll ask it to all of you and ask you to respond maybe 2 minutes, so we can finish in 10 minutes. Regarding for the moving from Charis's research, it seems that in the Greek Cypriot part, 38% prefers bicommunal federation, and the Turkish side 53%. And of course, if you look at the others who can tolerate, it increases to about 70+%. And all the other solutions seems to be non-acceptable, at least one side. But even in this bicommunal, it doesn't normally get majority. It could be accepted, but that's my understanding. It could be accepted if it's the last choice and only choice. So the question is it this enough to base a future for a bicommunal, bizonal federation or federative solution, or the current trend on the island is forcing this to change as well? And also, again, your views for the future. Let me start with Emine this time.
Yeah, there is another clear fact that's come out in all the polling done, and that is that bicommunal bizonal federation is not the first choice, the clear first choice of either side. So we're not talking about everybody getting exactly what they want. That is not a compromise. That is not how a solution is going to come about. But I really admire Charis's work in that he's looking at, okay, if we can't, each side can't get their best choice, is there one that they can tolerate or find acceptable under those terms, just to get us started? Because a bizonal, bicommunal, federal solution is not the end. It is the beginning. It is how the two sides find an umbrella to go under in order to start doing other work, to start really integrating, to start really unifying the communities, to start working together, producing together, sharing power, sharing wealth, sharing administration. So as the BBF, as we call it, is not first choice. But now we see from the polls that neither is the status quo. The status quo is not dominantly the preferred solution for size, and this is being more and more obvious. Nobody likes where they are. A Greek Cypriot will tell you their many reasons, and a Turkish Cypriot will tell you theirs, and they're totally different. But ultimately, the desire and the push is that there is a better way of proceeding, and the BBF is a vehicle to that, not an end in itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Charis, for the future.
Yeah, for the future, I wanted to, I'm really looking forward to the next 6 months in what's going to happen in Cyprus. I hope that we have a leadership that is ready to support a compromise solution in both communities. I hope that there won't be any, wrong decisions made, especially the issue of Famagusta, that was mentioned earlier, is very important for the solution of the Cyprus problem. Why? Because for a lot of Greek Cypriots, especially people who are internally displaced from Famagusta, Famagusta has always been taken for granted as the part of Cyprus that is going to be returned in case of a solution, case of a bizonal, bicommunal federation that will be returned to the Greek Cypriots. If somehow you take this out of the equation by, for example, opening the Varosha for people who are not the legal inhabitants, then I think many people will not only get very disappointed, but somehow lose also a significant incentive for a solution beyond everything we have discussed. So I wanted to finish by stressing the importance of not losing sight of avoiding such a mistake. Keeping Famagusta as part of a package solution. If possible, I think we could discuss being part of a CBM, like confidence building measure, somehow find a formula to open it for its legal owners, but somehow find ways for the Turkish community to benefit in the rebuilding of the whole town. I think we need innovative solutions, not towards separating people, but towards bringing people to work together. And I think in the short term, such kind of CBMs would go a long way in facilitating a solution to the problem.
Good. Thank you very much. Erol?
Yes. I'll keep with my pessimistic form.
Thank you.
Cyprus is an island, but of course not an island unto itself. It's affected by the currents around it. And clearly, there are many contingencies that have just been discussed with respect to, if this happens, that will be bad. If this happens, that will be good. I can't see many things going in the right direction. The secular trend may go in the right direction. Younger generations of people may be more cosmopolitan and therefore more worldly in their perspective, and they may be able to transcend the Cyprus problem in a number of ways and reconfigure elements of it. That would work long term. But in the short term, neither the geopolitics nor the politics within alliances nor within countries are auspicious. We're living in an era of unprecedented polarization and mistrust. All the countries that we model ourselves around, including the European Union, are facing unprecedented challenges. So it seems to be the least auspicious time to solve the Cyprus problem. 10 years ago, things were on a different trajectory. Right now, things are in a trajectory that leads to a chaotic situation. I know that sounds pessimistic, but some things are beyond our control. And so really the best we can hope for is that we get back to where we were before the pandemic, that we start normalizing our relations again, so that expectations are in place, so that people can feel free to cross and engage with other people, because those are the things which we're giving people positive experiences, which bodes well for the future. I'm just concerned right now that this pandemic will be an excuse, not only in Cyprus, but around the world, for greater authoritarianism. So I hate to sound pessimistic, but I am. And so I'll finish on that note.
Thank you for that sobering intervention. So let's finish with, as we started, and we finish with Xenia. Let's hear your views.
Well, dear Mustafa, I truly believe that 2020 will be crucial for Cyprus, in the sense that I think that we are reaching somehow a deadlock that is coming not because we have decided to, but because time is reaching to an end. So I truly believe that by 2020, if we have some developments positive that can reopen the window for discussing once again the solution based on a federal model, that would be a great success. Otherwise, I'm really, really concerned that maybe 2020, if we don't have some severe progress on the negotiation table, that it will put the end to the discussion concerning the bifederal solution. So I think that the next few months, they are really crucial, and I think that it's also very important to make sure that throughout these next months we will be able to at least not to send any negative messages to each other. So I think that we should really, really try to send the message also to the academic community in Turkey and in Greece in particular, and to the political leadership of both countries, that the only way to set Cyprus free, independent, and to have a real future for the next generations of Cypriots is to really to seek to honestly find the solution this time. And I think it's not going to be an easy task, definitely, but I think it's really our very, very last chance that we have this time. So I really hope that we will be able to have the courage to stand up to the expectations of the Cypriot people. Okay. Thank you for hosting us.
Thank you very much, Xenia. And let me thank everybody here who's both attending as a speaker, but also who's here to listen our speakers to discuss the Cyprus issue. As I said, I think there is still room to talk and to discuss. Did I not ask Emine to talk in this? Somebody want? Yes, I did. Yes, of course. Yes, yes. You are making me nervous. Somebody send me a note that Emine didn't speak. Okay. Let me thank again everybody. And this was part of Foreign Policy Talk series by Panorama and International Center for International and European Studies of Kadir Has University. And we will continue and hope to see you in next installments. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.